December 1941. After 2 long years of war, America finally entered the conflict, causing 16 million men to enlist in the military and leave their factory jobs behind. So women stepped up and put themselves in place of the men who were fighting in Europe. However, the percentage of female workers only rose 10%, moving from 27% in 1940 to 37% in 1945. The war created new opportunities for women beyond teaching and staying at home with kids. There were now many types of jobs that women could take part in, including manufacturing jobs and jobs in the service industries. They even worked in bat factories. One such factory was Hillrich and Bradsby Company. Today this factory is known as the Louisville Slugger Factory, where they made baseball bats. Usually these bats, made there or elsewhere, were for the male players in the league. At this time, they were being made for soldiers and the newly created All-American Girls Professional Baseball League so that baseball fans would still have a league to watch. Although it wasn't evident at the time, these new jobs would lead to a turning point in history and an incredible change for women's rights. September 1945. Japan surrendered and the war ended. This started the nationwide Homecoming 1945, where men would return home to their families and old jobs. With twice as many people in the factories and no more rationing, America's economy boomed and got back on track. Even though life was going great for the citizens of America, something was off. It was hard to notice at first, but then it became clear. Although women were filling the same working roles as men, women were receiving a lower salary than men. With an average weekly salary of $31.21, women were earning well under the average man's salary, which was around $50 per week. One specific woman who noticed this was Esther Peterson. Esther Peterson, born in 1906 in Provo, Utah, she started her teaching career in an all-girls private school in Boston, and by the end of World War II, she became the first lobbyist for the National Labor Relations Board in Washington, D.C. In 1948, the State Department offered her husband a position as a diplomat in Sweden. While she lived in Sweden, she worked as part of the women's committees of the Swedish Confederation of Trade Unions and the International Confederation of Free Trade Unions. This gave her a new perspective on how not just American women were fighting for equal pay. When she returned in 1957, she worked as the first female front desk worker of the Union Department of the AFL-CIO, and helped with Kennedy's Utah campaign while he ran for president. When he was elected in 1961, Peterson was appointed head of the Women's Bureau in the Department of Labor. She then decided that she needed to focus her work towards equal pay for women, but doing so would be hard, so she decided to talk with President Kennedy and ask him to create the Equal Pay Act. President Kennedy was fully supportive.
Attempting to make sure that the women, for example, who work, 1/3 of our working force are women. We want to try to encourage every company in the United States and certainly stimulate governmental leadership in providing equal pay and equal conditions for women. 22 states do it now. We can do a much better job on that.
Kennedy's support for working women was also seen in his creation of the Presidential Commission on the Status of Women, which was chaired by Eleanor Roosevelt, former First Lady with an interest in civil rights. Peterson also needed to reach Congress with the idea of this act, but it would take a lot of work. In 1870, Congress tried to pass a bill discriminating unequal pay, but it was watered down in the Senate because the original language was weakened, causing the bill to be less effective. Peterson would have to use the framework of that bill to create one that she could convince Congress to pass. Luckily, she was not alone. She had Catherine St. George and Edith Green. St. George was a state representative of New York and a first cousin to Franklin D. Roosevelt. Green was a state representative of Oregon and the second woman ever to be elected from the state. Both of them led the charge for a bill in Congress. With the support of President Kennedy, it seemed that this bill would be a success, but not everyone shared this perspective. Businesses of different kinds wanted to avoid this act being passed. They thought it would be too expensive to pay both genders the same. For years and years, as women protested and fought and worked towards equal pay, business owners fought against it, employers fought against it, and women wouldn't back down. Finally, on June 10, 1963, John F. Kennedy signed the Equal Pay Act into law. In the Oval Office, many women watched it happen. Peterson was there watching as all her hard work paid off. After the signing, Kennedy said, "I am grateful to those members of Congress who worked so diligently to guide the Equal Pay Act through. It is a first step. It affirms our determination that when women enter the labor force, they will find equality in their pay envelopes. Women were optimistic. Unfortunately, business owners didn't listen and they found easy loopholes. On the actual document, there's a section on exemptions. One of those exemptions is if the male worker has a higher ranked job. The company is then allowed to pay them more. This gave business owners and employers the idea of changing the names of men's jobs to make them sound more important. A woman could be working as a manufacturer alongside a man, but employers renamed the job senior manufacturer to be able to pay them more. This meant that the employers weren't breaking the law, so no one could stop them. Although this act was a monumental turning point, it ended up being unsuccessful, and women would have to keep fighting for their rights for a lot longer. Esther Peterson would continue to stand up for women for many years to come. In fact, in an interview in 1969, she analyzed more on how the Equal Pay Act was a turning point for women, discussing their status prior to and following the crucial effort.
We have just now issued the guidelines. I call them the guidelines for the gals, and it will tell and help industry to know what does constitute a discrimination. Why are the women always in the low wage, the low salary areas? You see, for a long time, it's been perfectly all right to women to clean, to sew, to cook, and to do perform these jobs that are women's natural jobs in the home.
After, she became a voice for consumers within the White House and food industry until she died in 1997. In 1972, Title IX of the Education Amendment was signed into law by President Nixon. The amendment was created to prohibit discrimination on the basics of sex and education programs, including sports. This was supposed to ensure that women got equality and possibly equal pay while playing in sports leagues. In 1980, the fight had been going on for almost 40 years. A few new slogans came into play and some of the new ways of reaching out were created. One of the most famous of the sayings was "raises not roses," meaning women want equal pay, not to be treated like damsels in distress. Advertisements and shows were created to spread awareness about their fight. One little advert created depicts a man sitting at a desk next to a sign reading, "The buck stops here." A woman is sitting at a desk next to a sign that says, "59 cents stops here." This was created to show the pay gap between men and women. Women Who Work, created by Grace Hutchins, was a show created to spread awareness about the plight of working women. And even though all these adverts and shows were made, women still had to battle for equal pay, and nothing was changed until 2009. On January 29, 2009, President Obama signed the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act into law with 61 yeas and 36 nays. Recently, the Biden administration signed the Paycheck Fairness Act, which promotes equal pay and better paying jobs for women. Even though many revisions of the act were passed and there were only 80 years of fighting, women still only make 81 cents to every man's dollar in 2023. Modern-day sports leagues have one of the largest pay gaps at this moment in time. The USA women's soccer team made only 25 cents compared to the men's soccer team's dollar in 2023. Recently, an act was introduced and signed giving the teams equal pay. This act was called the Bipartisan S2333 Equal Pay for Team USA Law. However, there is still a large pay gap between NBA players and WNBA players. The base pay for starting NBA player is approximately $10 million, whereas the base pay for starting WNBA player is just over $76,000. Some conclude that because the WNBA doesn't bring in as much revenue as the NBA, the owners can use that excuse to not provide equal pay. However, prominent college athletes like Caitlin Clark are drawing major attention and shining a light on women's basketball. On April 7, 2024, the NCAA Women's Championship game drew in 18.9 million viewers. The following night, only 14.8 million people tuned into the NCAA Men's Championship. And the NBA Finals in 2023 were only viewed by an average of 11.6 million people. Will the popularity of Clark and others bring about a change in the pay discrepancy as they enter the WNBA? From the factories to the courts, the Equal Pay Act proved to be a significant turning point in history because it created a new reality for women, making them realize they could fight for equality no matter who or where they were.